Okay, today's lesson, or this week's lesson rather, is going to be a review about rhythm. And we're going to be talking about time signatures and also reviewing how we count in standard time when we're used to takadimi. Okay, so if we're looking at a review of what rhythm is, we first look at the definition for it, and that's a strong and regular repeated pattern of movement or sound, which means that in our case, we're going to be talking about it as sound, right? And one of the ways we organize that is through a time signature, which by definition says an indication of rhythm following a clef, generally expressed as a fraction with the denominator defining a beat as a division of a whole note and the numerator giving the number of beats in each bar, which sounds like a lot. So let's break this down. We're going to look at some time signatures, which we see on our screen right now, and we may have seen these before. We'll talk about which ones are the same and which ones are different. The important thing is going to be looking at this bottom thing. How many beats in a measure, and what note gets the beat. And we're talking about what note gets the beat first, actually, because it's actually kind of easy to understand the top. Now, the top could relate to, like, thinking about how many beats we count when we're counting rests. But if we're counting the bottom, it's a little more complicated. If the bottom note is a 1, it means a whole note. If it's a 2, it's a half note. A 4, meaning a quarter note, which is what we see most often. We oftentimes see eighth notes as well, and sometimes we see 16th notes. And basically what that means is that's the dividing factor, and the top note is how many of those. So if we see a 4 over 4, we're saying there are 4 quarter notes in a measure. If we're looking up top now, we'll see 4 over 4, meaning that there are 4 quarter notes. The next symbol you see is a C, which is common time, which means 4/4, because 4/4 is the most common time, which is like 4 quarter notes. Now, when we see 2/2, also known as cut time, which is what's on the side of it, that's like 2 half notes as our main beat. We can see 2/4, which is 2 quarter notes, very common. 3/4, meaning 3 quarter notes. And if you see something like 6/8, that means that there are 6/8 notes in that beat. And the reason we need to know this is because as we mature, our music matures too. And so the best way to actually count these rhythms then is to think about standard counting. Okay, so as we're looking at rhythms now, we're going to look first at eighth notes. And we're going to see we have a whole note. And so we have 2 ways of representing this. We have, which is a circle rhythm. So if you think about time repeating and kind of circling back around on itself versus a linear thought. In a linear grid, I've shared with you before. So if we look at a whole note, for example, in the circular, it's going to take up that whole green little middle. And that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, because we're in 4/4 time. If we look at half notes, right, we would see them as 1, 2, 3, 4. So that would be the top half of the circle and the bottom half of the circle. When we get into quarter notes, we're thinking 1, 2, 3, 4. So each one cuts that circle into a quart or represents one sort of quarter of this linear grid. Now, if we look at eighth notes, though, and if you look at the circle side, I'm drawing these as individual eighth notes. We can see them packaged as a 2-pack like we do on the linear side, or we can have them individual. But when we were to count those, they'd be like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And whichever way makes sense to you is perfectly fine to help you visualize it. And it does make it a little bit easier if we count in standard when we're looking at things like this dotted rhythm, right? Which would be like 1, 1 and 2 and 3, right? So if we were going to play that on our instrument or clap it, we'd have 1 and 3 and. Which is hard to do if we're doing takadimi, right? Going ta, ta, ti, 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 ta, ti, ta, ti, ta. But it's not quite the way it would line up. It'd be like ta, ti, ta, ta type thing. Now, we can also look at 16th note versions. And that's going to be what this diagram is breaking down for you. 16th notes, it starts the same way. It starts with whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes. And a 16th note means that we took an eighth and we cut it even one more time. So if we're thinking about this, circle diagram as a pizza, instead of having 8 slices, we chop them into 16 skinny slices, right? Where each quarter now, instead of being 1 big piece or 2 pieces, became 4 pieces. And we count that instead, where we had 1 and 2 and for eighth notes, we could have 1 E and a for 16th notes. So instead of going 1 and 2 and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So it chops us into smaller beats. And the reason why this is more helpful as we start more advanced music is because now we're going to start seeing music that has a combination of an eighth note with 2 16ths, right? Like 1 E and, or 2 16ths with 1 eighth note, or 2 16ths with 1 eighth note would be 1 E and, right? Or we can have 1 and a, right? Or we can have a dotted eighth and a 16th, which would be 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, right? If we did that. And so we can actually then kind of count with inside our beats by breaking them down a little bit more, and we have an easier repetitive language for that, right? And if you see around here, I did that 1 E and a, 2 E and a, right? To go around the circle. And again, double 16ths that are broken off out of their 4-pack have a little like double flag on them. Okay, so we're going to do some rhythm drills, and I'm going to basically talk you through how we would write and how we would say these rhythms, which is what we're looking for on our quizzes. So if we had standard counting, we would have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's because we're in a 4/4 time signature. All of our notes are relating to that, and being at there, they are half notes. We would hold those out if I was playing a wind instrument or if I was rolling on a snare drum. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I look at my next one, also in 4/4, and now we have a rest in there, right? So if we're going to write a rest in, we're going to put it in parentheses. 3, 4. We have a half note, and at the end we have a whole note, right? So we'd have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'd want to hold those together, like keep them in the same breath. Our next one's also in 4/4, and this would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we have some eighth notes, right? 1 and 2 and 3, 4. Then we have a dotted half note, right? And if you remember, a dotted half note is going to be held for 3 beats because it's the same as having a half note plus a quarter note. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3 and 4 to end that line out. And there's a dotted half note in the next beat. Also, we see a tie, so it would be like 4, 1. They would kind of connect in our next example, right? And this one's again 4, 4. So we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? And you remember that those two like tie together. So if they're the same note and they're connected, you would hold them together. And then our next example, if we take a look at the beginning of it, is this is 4/4, but there's a random quarter note that's not in a whole measure. So what do we do with that? Well, it's a pickup note. And what that means is it starts the beat before. So if I was counting us off, I'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, right? There'd be bum, bum before the note actually starts. So we would count this to start ourselves in. We'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4. And a dotted quarter note is kind of like having a quarter note with an eighth note, right? So that's why we would have 3 and 1, right? 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3. Now notice they didn't put a fourth note in there. That's because it depends on what would come next and how they borrowed that time from the beginning, because they stole the quarter note from the end to put it at the beginning, and it gets kind of weird. It depends on what comes next, though. This one also has a pickup note, right? So we would think again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, and 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 4, 1, 2, 3, and then there's a random thing, right? And again, we have that dotted quarter note, which we'll go over dotted rhythms again in their own lesson because dotted rhythms are weird. Now, if we look at the end, we notice we're in common time now, which is the same as 4/4, right? They just wrote it with a C instead. And this has some 16ths, right? So we start at the beginning, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and. Cool. Second measure, though, we're going to see 1 E and a 2, 3 E and a 4. Now, if you're a percussionist, you're pretty used to that. Our last line, right? 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4. Right? And as a wind player, you're like, well, that'd be scary. But again, knowing how to count it helps because you couldn't see stuff like this. Like in our last line, again, they wrote it with a C, like common time. And so this is going to be like 1, 2 E and a 3, 4 E and a 1, and 2, and 3 E and a 4, and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3, 4. Right? Where those 16s are in a group of 4. I know that was a lot to go over, but that's kind of the end of this. Now, this should help you. I did do some pause checks that you got stuff along the way, and it will help you with the quizzes where we basically want you to, the way I put 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1 E and a 2, I want you to pick the correct answers for those on the quizzes.